Right. So tonight we're gonna do some testing. We're gonna take it slow. It's gonna be a chill stream. I'm not gonna try to hit my 1 hour and go over by an hour and stream for 2.5 hours. I'm just gonna go until I feel like stopping. Um, switch. So this is what we have on the backlog for today. I don't think we're gonna hit all of this, but what I want to kind of start to flesh out is some of our testing infrastructure for the app. So we've written some tests already for little odds and ends, but it's all stuff that can run without a database, right? So here's our tests for comparing our Doodle passwords. Um, there's others scattered throughout here. Something else I'm kind of trying to figure out how I want to do is I'm is how we organize tests. I kind of want to give putting the test next to the code or close to the code a shot. I've always just had a test directory that mirrored the source directory and done it that way. Um, just because that's how a lot of Java projects did it, and a lot of the PHP community was organized that way. It seems like uh, Ruby's organized that way, but or they didn't like the test directories don't seem to, or I guess Rails specifically, Rails community seems to have that source test directory, but the test directory doesn't necessarily mirror the source directory. It's more organized around like feature and like what is being tested, kind of. Um, Python, I believe, puts their tests like this dunder test dunder is kind of a thing, but they love their dunders over in Python land. Could be wrong. Um, JavaScript, I've seen it like there seems to be no standard. It's like whatever. So seen a lot of this. I've seen tests at the root. I've seen tests next to the file. Right. Well, that's a folder. I don't want to do that. Database test. Yes. So one thing I do like about this is if it's a unit test, this makes a lot of sense because it's like it's right next to the thing you're testing, and this you would assume would have no dependencies on anything else. It's just testing this in isolation. Um, so yeah, I don't know where we're gonna land on that. What I want to focus on tonight is a lot of the uh, technique around dealing with the database state. So at the very least, getting the database migrated up to the latest migration, and then starting the test on a blank slate, and then between tests, kind of tearing all that down and getting back to the between test modules, getting back to that same clean state. And there's a bunch of ways we could do that. The other thing I kind of want to have is some assertions for the database. Um, I'm gonna try. I don't think I want to write a whole lot of um, tests that are like uh, just there to verify that the programming language is doing what it's supposed to do. So like, as an example, our models. Let's say I have like our channel create. So if I go look at that controller, I could write a test that's like, let's run a channel create as a name and an owner, and then let me query the database and see that it inserted a row into the database and that I see the name that was what I passed in and I see the owner ID, which is what I passed in. I never really found too much value in those kinds of tests. Like I'd almost rather just say, okay, well, I create the channel and then I find a channel by the ID that was given back to me here. and I assert that the original channel and the rehydrated channel's IDs match, or the names match, or something like that. So it's almost like just testing my API, but kind of the test ignores as much as possible what's actually happening behind that API. But I figure let's take a stroll through and look at some different things. When I was working with Laravel a lot, I actually did like how um, their database testing facilities were set up. And their docs have changed a lot, so I may have trouble finding things. So I guess we'll just go top to bottom. So this is a PHP unit test case. And they've got this example where before each one of these methods, we refresh the database. And if I remember correctly, refresh database actually like rolls back all the migrations to fresh state and then rolls them back forward. So you could imagine like before I run this function, I've got to tear everything down, build it back up to a blank state, and then I can run this. That'll take some time. And if I remember right, like this is PHP, so this is a trait that they bring in, and traits inside of this trait is a bunch of like functions that are like hooks into the PHP unit framework. So there's going to be like a setup function and a teardown function and a bunch of other odds and ends. But with refresh database, also remember there was like there was a mode that used like transactions. To like start a transaction, you would it'd run the test method. So it'd like roll up all the migrations to the current state, seed the database with whatever if you were going to do that, and then it would start a transaction and your test case would run inside of that transaction, and then they'd roll it back at the end of the test case. So those were a lot faster. I don't know with connects that we'll be able to do that in a reasonable way, but we'll see. So the other thing that we can think about is something called factories. So it's basically just a way of generating fake data. So imagine like if we had a channel, if I wanted to say a fake, await channel fake, and imagine this like generated a random name and it created a random user and associated that user's ID with this channel. But this would be like this fake would be a factory method. And we might have different ones. Like you might have a scenario where, I don't know, like you might have different scenarios that you might pass in via a string right here or whatever, and it would set different things up. In general, I'd prefer to keep the factories, if we even have them in this app, simple, and then in the test case actually show, like if we're going to have more complexity, show it in the setup of the test. Because it is kind of like, if you have factories that do a lot of stuff, if you're the one that wrote them, you know what they do. Hopefully they have a decent name so that others that come in can see what they do, but there's nothing like seeing exactly what's happening to really explain how that works, or explain what's going on as part of the test. So this is more factory stuff. And you see they have kind of similar syntax. So call some factory method, make, goes and actually creates those models in memory. I don't think this, so without persisting to the database. So you can make a bunch of these kind of in memory and do stuff with them. If you wanted to make 3 users, it looks something like this. Create method does it. We're not going to try to emulate Laravel or whatever, but it's interesting to see how this, like, basically this is kind of shining a light on the types of problems we, may run into. So this is more like describing user has posts. So I'm going to create a fake user, and then also 3 fake posts associated with that user, and then create this whole chain. So you'd end up with 3 post models and 1 user model in the database. So without getting further into this, the assertions I really liked in Laravel. So if we were going to write the style of test I said I don't like writing, but if we were, I would want the assertions to look like this. So imagine we went this way, and we wanted to make sure that we saw this rec body name and this ID in the appropriate fields. What we could do is say const record equals await. And this is in a controller, but imagine it was in a test. I'm not going to import connects, but just imagine I did. So we'd say channels where ID is channel.id. And we'd pull that in and then assert, so expect or record.id to be channel.id. And you would come through and say, okay, the name should be that. Well, we could do it like this. Let's say we'll stick with just the rec body name and the res locals ID. So you could say expect name to be rec body name, and expect channel ID or record ID to be res.locals.uid. So this would load that record from the database, and then we could assert individual fields or that. That's kind of what this is doing. So assert the database has a user with this email address, right? And there's the opposite of it. Assert, imagine like you deleted a user, then you would assert the database is missing a user with an email address, sally@example.com. And then this is kind of like the same thing, but it's around a model instance instead, I guess. This one could be interesting too. So it's like if you knew you had 0 users in a fresh state and you go to create a user, then you could assert that the database count of users, so the amount of rows in the user table is 5. And that's just as easy to do over here. You know, we could just do like grab all of our channels and then expect record dot, this will be records dot length to be 5, right? So you can imagine like writing a function for this really wouldn't be that bad. It'd be something like, well, it's not gonna let me copy that, but assert database count table, and then this is rows. And then we could say expect a full query on this table to be, say, length. We'll wrap this in parens, make that async, and expect it to have that many rows. I think we could even like maybe do something like let's see, there's like a to have length rows, right? So this would be that assertion, and run the expectation, da 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 da. But then in our test code, we just say assert database count channels 1 after we did that create. And this would pass or fail. So like we're already kind of doing it, but this is the kind of stuff I would like to have available in some test utilities whenever we get down the road a bit. So assertions are on our list of things to really pay attention to. So think through possible assertions. Database assertions. Oh, we might care about. So assert database count, we might as well do. There might be some use in that. Assert database has. This one's great. And we might as well do assert database missing, which will probably just call this and just return the opposite of it, whatever it is. So that's that. The other problem is, like what I was saying, we need a way to clear out the database or whatever. AQ, what are you doing, man? Don't be using that language with me. Boom. Type that up. So yeah, we need to figure out a way of resetting our database between test runs. So I know there's ways to do that. This isn't Jest. It's just JS. Clear out that database. That's right. So inside, well, first, let me get rid of all this. I'll tell you what. We'll stash this off to the side because that's basically we just did the work. So inside of a test module, so a test file over here, we'll of course have our different tests, If we wanted to run some code before each one of these test blocks, then we can call before each and pass it an anonymous function that just runs code. So this is kind of the example. This is, a baby's first example of how you might go about this, where before each of these tests, I'm initializing this database, and after each test, I'm clearing that database, right? So inside of initialize might be run my migrations, and then clear city database might just drop the database at the end, right? You could do this differently and be like, initialize would have like a global variable to tell whether or not it has migrated the database. And if it hasn't, it migrates it, creates all your tables. And then it either leaves it there or inserts some what's called seed data, which would be kind of like let's say you had a table full of cities. You might pre-populate that with some cities so that you're not always having to do that in your tests or whatever, which it looks like that's what's happening here. So you would set up migrate the database once, and then if it's the second time you run this, if it's already migrated, then you wouldn't do anything. And then when you're clearing the city database, maybe instead of dropping the entire database, you just truncate the tables. So you remove all the rows from the tables. But however you choose to do it, this is going to take some time. So imagine, it takes a second and a half to migrate your database, which doesn't seem like a whole lot. And then it takes another half second to insert all these cities. So you got 2 seconds to set up a database, and it takes a half second to drop the database. And that's what we do every time. So 2 seconds, 2 seconds, and this will probably, a normal test module might have 10, 20 test methods in it. So you got 40 seconds, worst case, to test a city module or whatever. So imagine it's like 40 seconds to test channel, 40 seconds to test message, 40 seconds to test user. The reality of it is you don't want to write a whole lot of these tests. So like rather than write database or like full integration tests for each one of these models, I might just have an integration test that's more like an acceptance test that just kind of exercises them all in a way that fits kind of this narrative we've been following along. So like I log in, I create 2 channels, I send a message to one, I send a message to the other. Someone else logs in, they try to delete my message, they can't. they try to edit my message, they can't. Stuff like that. So this before each will run before each one of these test methods. We also have before all and after all. Before all runs once before any of these tests run. So this is a great way of doing some time savings. So instead of migrating the database and then dropping it every test, we can migrate here, and after we're done, we drop the database. So then maybe in your before each, you would set up your tables, and in your after each, you would delete all the data from the tables, but the database itself would stay intact. So now maybe you're at a half second for populate data, clear data, populate data, clear data. So it's a second to run these down from 4 seconds. So that's like a pretty huge savings. If you have more complex tests, I think a lot of ours will just, it'll stay at the root or whatever. But imagine you have a model that has a lot of complex rules in certain scenarios. What you might do is use this describe block to kind of say, okay, now when the model is in this scenario, here's the test for testing business rules along that scenario. Now that's what you would use describe for, is to kind of scope your test to some specific use case. What this documentation is saying is that the before eaches that are inside of a describe only apply to the tests inside of that describe block, right? So this will only run twice. It won't run for these. But I do believe this, and yeah, there's a comment right there, the before eaches at the root do apply to all tests. So you can get, this shit can get kind of complicated, more complicated than it needs to be. Especially if you could nest describe blocks and do all kinds of crazy shit. So anyway, this is a good page to come back to as a reference, and they have examples here of use this to just log out some stuff and show you the order it's going to run in. If it were me, I don't get too crazy with this stuff to the point that you need to worry about the order tests are running. As much as possible, you should write tests so that the order doesn't matter. In fact, a lot of test frameworks, I don't know if Jess does this, but a lot of test frameworks, you can have it randomize the order the tests run as a way of keeping yourself honest. Jess probably does have a way of doing that. Okay, I don't need that. So what I'm not seeing here is, that I know exists, is a way of, before the suite starts, that's going to run all of your test files, run a piece of code. And then after it's done, run a piece of code. I'm pretty sure that's going to be in the configuration of Jest. And there's a global setup, maybe. Yeah. Allow the use of a custom global setup module which exports an async function that is triggered before all tests, right? And then we'll have global teardown, which is you'll export a function that is the teardown. So in this way, I might say, okay, well, when this runs, I'll create my database and migrate it. And when this runs, I'll throw it away. So every test run, I'm going to get a whole fresh database to start with. And it'll be migrated to the current state. Which means each test module, if it touches the database, needs to be very disciplined about cleaning up after itself. Because if you don't throw that database away between test modules, you will have test data from one suite start leaking into the other modules, or test data from one module leaking into the other modules. And imagine like you've got two tests that are two different files that are doing something with channels, and you might have like an assertion up front that says, I expect there to be 0 channels in the system or whatever. But because this test over here was not disciplined and didn't clean up after itself, it asserted 0 channels, which was good at the time. It created the channel and then did some other stuff and didn't delete that channel. Now this test runs over here, asserts that there should be 0 channels, but this one channel is left over. So it fails. And in my experience, when that happens, a lot of the time you don't want to go clean it up. You just say like, fuck it, I'm going to throw away the whole database and go fix it. It's not something you'd like try to resolve at that point. So I think these two are going to be what we want to use for our setup teardown. While we're here, let's take a look through. I think I already have Jest configured to reset mocks. Jest actually is a really great interface for mocking third-party modules or like any module and just replacing them with a either kind of like a spy that you could. It's still got the real implementation under the hood, but you can count, like you can get stats and metrics about like how those real implementations were called. But the thing is, it's like it's kind of wrapping that library in the test execution environment. So you have to explicitly at the end of a test tell it to unwrap. And this what was it, reset mocks or whatever, automatically does that for you. So that's nice. That whole like it wraps onto it at runtime and then having to remember to release that mock, that's something that isn't in a whole lot of frameworks. But so I can see like this allows you to write tests that don't have a lot of cruft in them, like that type of minutia in them. But yeah. So let's see. I've got my Jest config here. Let's look for global setup. Path to a module that exports async function is triggered once before all test suites. So this is where like my brain starts getting all like, what are other people calling this file? Where are they putting this file? And it doesn't matter. So we could make a directory called tests and just start throwing stuff in there. I kind of wanted to keep this directory reserved for like acceptance tests or like system-wide tests. So I'm kind of apprehensive about doing this. We know we're going to have test utils. So we're going to have some assertions and some other things that really aren't part of the code, the source of the application. So I might just roll with this for a little bit and see how that feels. As far as this is concerned, this is kind of like bootstrapping kind of stuff. It's bootstrapping the test environment. So not bootstamp, bootstrap. So maybe we have a JavaScript file here, or a module, a bootstrap module, and it exports a, what does that have to export? A global setup. What is the function name? Oh, do I have to have two separate files? That's kind of lame. But okay. So how about this? We'll just stick with their names. So setup, and this will export module.exports equals async right? I am setting up the database, the test environment. So then we'll say tear down. I am tearing it all up now, right? So they also mentioned this function gets just global config object as a parameter. I'm curious what that looks like. So let's do this. We'll just drop the config object there. And then we'll do the same thing over here. All right, now we need to tie our just config to this. So it says string, but it's like, does it say what this is relative to the just config, I guess? Let's give it a go. So we can say test utils setup.js. This can be test utils teardown.js, right? So let's run jest and see what happens. Module test setup in the global setup option was not found. Root directory is whack. So whack test utils setup.js. Let's try it without the function or without the extension. Nope. What do you want from me? Try this maybe. There we go. It's doing something different, so it's probably working. All right, so I am setting up the environment, and here's what the global config object looks like. So I'm gonna scan through this just to kind of get it in my brain, the types of things that are in here. I doubt we will ever use this. This looks like basically just the config file. Yeah, so like if you're watching or watching all, or... So I can't really think of a time I would use this as like logic in my setup, but it's a thing. So then the tests run, and now it's tearing it all down. Cool. So this works. Let me add these extensions back in. I'll try it again. Looks like it's working. Cool. So now in these functions, I'm gonna get rid of this. And we'll have a comment that's like, this should set up a database for testing. Create the database if doesn't exist. Migrate database to current. Apply any seed data necessary. Right, and then this should clean up to prepare for another test run. Okay, so the other thing we need to decide is whether we want a separate testing database than a separate database from what we're currently using, like to do poke it with a stick development. We probably do. I've done both. If you're good about cleaning up after yourself, it usually like doesn't matter. But you can get into issues just like we were talking about earlier, where you poke it with a stick, create some channels, and um, your tests fail because like you'll have assertions that are asserting that like up front I shouldn't have any channels. I create a channel, now I assert there is one channel. So I think we're gonna make two databases. So we're gonna be using connects to deal with our databasey things. So there's a few things we need to do. First, this connects file, if we remember, we've got it configured to just have like the one environment or whatever. We'll probably end up wanting to have multiple environments, and then this connects file will depend on environment which config is loaded or whatever. Trying to think if that's the direction I want to go, or if we just keep like a separate connects instance and configure it differently. So like in test utils, we could basically have a connects export that uses pretty much all the same stuff, but we hard code the database to be whack testing or something like that. Before we go too much further, there is something I want to check as far as, so like, let's say we did this and we were using connects file and we had them like per environment or whatever, had different configs, and it was all the same, like connects instance. Then we would need to see, we'd probably base what environment we're in on node env. So process.env dot all caps node underscore env. So let's go in our setup function and we'll just console.log process.env env.nodeenv and see what that is. And we'll also do this to just kill it so we don't have to wait for the test to run. So it's test. So that means if we went back to the connects file config, then we would have one for production and then one for test. So let's say, what's the normal nodeenv? I bet it's not set. Process.env.nodeenv. Yeah, it's undefined in this environment. So connects testing database best practice. Let's see if we can poke around and see what other projects are doing, what other people are doing. I do want the connects docs again, so we'll go ahead and pull that. Yeah, so see, this person is talking about doing that method I was talking about Laravel does, where they before each test method create a transaction, do whatever you're gonna do, and then roll that back at the end. The issue with that is that the way it's, I guess, mostly on us. We could write code so that we could do this a little bit easier, but we don't inject this connects instance here. And the way you start a transaction through connects is you would call like this. This would return a transaction object that you could just start chaining additional methods on. So you do this where da 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 da. But it also has your commit and rollback methods on it, right? So what we would have to do for something like this to work is you would have to pre-create this transaction object and inject it into this find by read. Or imagine it was like creates a write is probably better. So like you'd inject it into create here, and then this would actually be, that transaction or whatever that could be rolled back at the end. This poor guy's talking to himself. Nicely summed up the bad testing practices. Yeah. So I don't want to mock the DB. Yeah, I don't never. If you're gonna write tests that deal with the database, don't mock it. Just go with it. And if it takes too much time, it's probably a signal you shouldn't be writing that many tests that hit the database. In that case, it'd almost be like if you're gonna write tests that hit the database, like beneath your API layer, and then you're also gonna have tests that hit your API layer, and then you're also gonna have tests that go end to end from the browser. Just write the test from the end to end of the browser, or write the API test. You don't need all three of those layers, right? The only thing I will say, the only thing that will give you is if, well, actually, this isn't even true, but I was going to say, like, if something went wrong with the database, you might have a failure in the database test, but not in the API test. Something went wrong with your API spec, you might have a failure there, but not in the database, maybe not in the front end. But that's not really true, is it? Because, like, if you have a database failure that's due to, like, upgrading a package or something like that, it's probably going to affect your front end. And when it does, you'll have a stat trace that shows like some failure happened. So I don't know, but don't do this shit because that's just asking for trouble. You go up. This would lead to you'd mock out your database and then you'd go upgrade your version of MySQL or Maria to some new version that's drops support for something or changes the way like JSON functions work or something like that, and you'll never know. Your test will pass because you're mocking all of that. Um, roll back, remigrate, reseed the database after each test. It does seem like a great deal of overhead for each test. It is, and it is terribly slow. This statement right here would be the line that we would all decide whether we wanted to cross it or not. Me personally, if I were going down this path of testing the database, the speed of it, I would just assume that cost. That'd be the cost of ownership of those database tests. I wouldn't try to optimize too much of that because I'm already like, you're already doing kind of it's not a bad thing, but you're doing something that you know is going to be slow to gain some value. Doing something this whole like, I have each module get its own test database and separate them that way to have them all run in parallel. That's just adding complexity. When that breaks, you'll probably be the only one that knows how to fix it. Using SQLite, let's see. Yeah, so I didn't read his message up here, but I can guarantee you the reasons he dislikes this approach is because SQLite, while it's fast, it is not MySQL, and like foreign keys function differently in SQLite. So, namely, you'll usually hit an issue with you'll write a database migration that works fine on MySQL for local like your poke it with a stick testing. When you run your test suite, it fails because whatever you're doing doesn't work in SQLite. Your run-of-the-mill CRUD queries run fine on SQLite. So a select statement's a select statement, insert's an insert, an update's an update. But the migrations usually end up getting this like, well, if my node environment is test, I run this query to create the table. If my node environment is not test, I run this, So that's extra complexity. Let's see what the maintainer of Connects does. You test like startup system, initialize DB, and run migrations. So this would be like in our setup function. Before each test, we truncate all the tables with the Connects DB manager package. what is the package? Let's look that up later. But either way, I assume they just they leave all the tables there and they just kill all the data in there before every test method, or at least before every test module. They insert the data required for the test case. Yeah. We're not using Objection.js, but a lot of the API we've built over here is inspired by Objection. The only reason I'm not using Objection is because I wanted to demonstrate some of this content for educational purposes. But Objection's awesome. It's not a full ORM. It's like a thin layer on top of connects. So you still have access to like a raw query builder, but it does like the whole relating models together. It does a pretty good job of. Your other options are Sequelize, and if you're using TypeScript, there's Type ORM. Sequelize is a little bit wordy for me. Like there's a lot of code you write to get your objects straight. Objection is a great mix of that, and if you're writing TypeScript, it's even better. But anyway, they're saying this Objection is smart enough to, instead of like when you're inserting data, instead of doing like if you had 1,000 models you're going to create and run 1,000 inserts, and instead knows how to do a bulk insert that's just one statement. So that's cool. Run one test and then go to 2. So this sounds like before each test I cleared my tables and then I insert only what I need for that test, do some assertions, and then go to the next test so all the tables get cleared again. So this approach I like a lot. And we'll do it in a separate database. This is like, you can explain this pretty quick, right? It just comes at the cost of, since you're not doing that transaction stuff, this is a little bit slower. Yeah, similar to what's starting yesterday. Let me save this. We'll throw this in the merge request today, the pull request. This is a great conversation. So he's kind of he's alluding or getting into a concurrency problem in his tests. So if 2 tests from 2 different files touch the same table, run at the same time. Jest has the ability to have separate workers execute different test modules at the same time to speed things up. Or you can configure it so there's only one worker and then it runs everything in one line or one pipe or whatever. We're just going to do that, and it'll make the test run a little bit slower, but that's okay, and we won't have this issue at all. Okay. I'll come back to this and read it because that looks interesting. We'll see what this is. Wrapping unit tests in a transaction for easy cleanup. Okay, so this is interesting. I wonder if this gives us a solution for our model setup that we might could use. So they get a connects instance. This is like a factory for a fake user. It looks like. Or like a fake something, whatever it is. For see. Yeah. So like here, this is where they start that transaction, and then you would need a way of getting this transaction object into our model to do something with. I think. I'm not sure. Because like if we did this and then you just use the model, you could be on like a separate connection to the same database, which isn't gonna be doing transactions or whatever. So, yeah, it was worth a shot. So let's do something. Next file. Let's see. Development test. Let us I'm interested to know what the environment is whenever you run the migrations. Let's try that real quick. Because we do need this same thing where the goes up. Eval docker machine. So I'm gonna go into that. We're still gonna need our migrations to be able to connect to the database, is what I was gonna say. And right now it works because we've just said like no matter what, it's gonna be all these things. But you know, here if I console log process.env node-env and then run up, let's see what we get. Undefined. Okay. So I think what that really means is that when let's look at our database, we're going to end up doing something like this where let's say it can either be default or it can be testing. Just say test. So we could do like it's process.env.node-env or default. So if it's unset, you'll get the default, and it seems like the migrations have it unset. So that would do what we wanted to do. So I guess we could confirm that by coming back over here, and I think we can just nest the whole thing. I kind of wish some of these options we could make like global or whatever, which we'll come back to that. We can do that. But for now, say default. Let's get it working first, and then we can, you know, make it pretty. So there's that, right? And it still works, and everything else should work. Our tests, when they connect to the database, should fail. I don't think we have a test that connects to the database yet. Let's look at all our tests that run. Yeah, it's just this image test is all we have. So how about we do this? We'll go ahead and make us a project test folder. And ugh, I don't like that. Let's go with that. I don't like that it's at the top of the directory structure for some reason. So this will be test utils canary test.js, right? So we'll say connects coming from we'll fix this. I need to figure a way to like configure VS Code so that when it's like back end, it doesn't do this path alias stuff. It does like the normal common JS. But in the front end, I do want it to do that. I think we can achieve that with some nested JS configs, maybe. Get it out of my head, so I stop thinking about it. Explore nested JS configs to have different path mappings for front end, back end work. Anyway, that's not even right. The at. So what it's doing is like, I think VS Code is set up to do shortest path in your require, and at maps to source, right? So then this is shorter than this, but Node isn't gonna know what to do with that. Jest won't know what to do with it. I don't think. Let's see. Let's see if Jest knows what to do with this. Also that log connects test. Ats are awesome. Jest canary. When you're running Jest, that first argument there is a pattern. So you can type kind of any part of the file name, and it'll run just those files. So you see it didn't run the image test. That's a convenient way, if you name your files right, of kind of separating them into like, these are my database, these are my tests that touch the database, versus these are my unit tests, versus these are my acceptance tests, that type of stuff. Canary is kind of like, I'm just fucking around with stuff, I want to see how it works. So this didn't work, apparently. Or didn't run at all. It didn't run at all because, remember, here we're process exiting. So we get rid of this now. Let's run that again. Yeah, so cannot find module. So it's not that magical, unfortunately. And also, unfortunately, we have to do this number, the // All right. So if I try to do something with this, the test environment is, I'll say the node environment is process.env.nodeenv. And we'll try to query the channels table. So console.log await connects channels, right? Let's see what it does. Should fail. Shouldn't be able to connect, because it'll be pointed at an entry in that connects file that doesn't exist. Can I use await outside of an async? That's right. Can't do that. Cannot read property client of undefined. So that's probably what's going on. But if we come back to this test file and we add ourselves a key for test, then, and we'll leave it configured to talk to the current database we already have, it should start working at least. There's all our channels. All of our beautiful channels. All right. So now we need to let's clean this up a little bit. So we're going to make an object that's some defaults. So this will be in everything. We're not going to use like a different SQLite or Postgres or whatever. These will be the same for everything. And I'm not going to try to deduplicate everything, right? Like this would be the same across both, but I'm going to leave it. And then we'll take all this stuff away. And then to get this back in there, we can do ... defaults and ... defaults. And then run our tests again. And it still prints, so it's working. So this is our connects configurations kind of ripping and raring to go. Oh, we forgot to delete this. Let's try that one more time after making that change. Although it's connecting, so it's probably going to work. Yeah. All right. So we need to commit something. So we've set up Jest. We've set up our database, or got it closer to being set up for testing. Source API utils, database, and add test utils. I don't think I'm going to commit this canary test. We'll just use this as like a poke it with a stick that'll probably not ever make it to the repo. Do some basic save. Prepare connects and Jest for database testing. I don't think I made a branch. I didn't. Check out the what did I call this? The Great Testening. Oh, forgot to add test utils. And we'll go ahead and make our pull request as well. So, 1 episode 9, the Great Testening plus composition API shenanigans. You may or may not get to these shenanigans. I hope we do. All right. Cancel. What's funny about this is because I reference this here, this issue is going to have these like crazy ass references back to the Great Testening. So we've made our mark on the open source community with our fake ass Slack clone. All right. what was next? Okay, so in our setup function, we need to actually create our database. Actually, roll that back. Here, we're going to use all the same credentials and stuff, but we're going to call this, we either do MySQL test database, or we hard code it. I say we hard code it. I say that, and then this same value is going to be referenced in somewhere else. So what we do this. We're going to hard code it, but we're not going to allow it to be overridden by a environment variable. Yeah, maybe one day. So our test database will be called either whack test or test whack. We'll call it whack test. All right. So now that points to test whack. Sorry, whack test. In our setup function, we have to create a database. So I know for a fact that let's do something like this just for giggles. We connects, and this will have to go to / source. Is that it? Okay. So I know that we can do await connects raw create database. And then we pull in our config module. See how annoying that is to do? Config.mysql. Why aren't you auto-completing though, is the question. That's the entire reason this thing exists, is to do autocomplete. I have to rely on autocomplete or IntelliSense for stuff because my short-term memory is so bad, like I can't remember anything. Oh, that's why. Let's call this global config because that's really what it is. Now it works. Cool. So that'll create our database. Let's do the opposite of that in the teardown. Actually, tell you what, we aren't going to tear down because I want to verify that it actually gets created, because this is going to happen so fast that I'm lying. We'll just drop database, and then our canary test will run a query to see our list of databases, which I think is just show databases. Show databases. Yeah. So we've got setup, run a raw query, create database, blah, drop database, blah. And then here we will console.log connects raw show databases. We have to await that. I almost fell into the trap there. You might not have caught that, but I was hitting up looking for Just Canary, and we typed too many commands. So it would have been like 30 more and I would have found it. So unknown database, whack test. So surely you don't have in your connection, you have to know the database. It's complaining that we're going ahead and saying this database, but it doesn't exist. So like, what happens if I drop that? It probably doesn't like that. Oh. Whack test is there, and now it shouldn't be there anymore, right? So bin MySQL, because the teardown should have gotten rid of it. Show databases. but it's still there. Drop database, whack, test. So why didn't our teardown work? Oh, global config. Okay, let's try that one more time. And what we'll do is, let's actually write a test. So, looks like the way this is structured, we have an array, and the first array is records. And then this is a column definition. Yeah, so this is like a schema for, I don't fucking know what, but I've noticed like raw queries end up coming back like this. It doesn't like prettyfy it for us. So if we wanted to say, we got an array, databases, and we don't care about the rest of it. So we can destructure that out of the response from this query. We have whack test database. So in our databases, we need to do something with that. Let's map this. So we'll say records, and then const database equals records map for record maps database. And now we'll expect databases to contain whack test. And let's run it. I could have just console locked that. I'm trying to give myself muscle memory on writing more tests in jest. So let's see, connects is not defined. It isn't defined because we didn't do it. We're really firing on all fours right now. So now we have to clean up that database because this didn't drop the database. And this is kind of the issue you face with database tests is if the test suite doesn't do its job right, you end up in a weird, inconsistent state. That sucks. Oh, canary. Look at that. Beautiful. I'm curious. Okay, so what's happening here is this connects, not this connect, it might be that one, but this connects connection hangs open. I am curious to see what this flag does for us though. Well, this is great. We got a test database now, and we can query it and mess around in it. That is important. This is new shit. It just sits there. So let's go Google something. Connects connection not closing at end of script async. So I know this works. This does work. But you do have to like wait for everything to be done. I almost wonder what happens if we do something like this. Connects, destroy. Let's see if this gets rid of our yellow worrisome text here. No. Do I have to await? Do I have to await it to get it to run? No. What if I do it in the test instead? I think technically, like, you'd have to do it everywhere to use this, because these are all possibly different connections out of the pool. Just remember, in the connects, we're configuring a min pool size of 2, max of 10. So this would support up to 10 like persistent SQL connections at a time. And when you run a query, it just grabs, it establishes a connection, maintains that pool. So it's not like you have one global connects object you're messing with. I bet if we did something like 1 and 1, something like this probably works. Let's see. I'm gonna guess it won't, because that's my luck, but I'm curious. Yeah, it didn't. So let's keep Googling. Just not closing. I hope someone has an answer in here. It's closed. I like it. So let's see what this does. I think we'll still have to do, we aren't going to want to put this in all of our files. We'll forget to put it in one, so I think we're going to use whatever that global way of doing that was. But I think we also have to do the destroys here. But let's run our tests and just see. Yeah. So in setup, we need to clean up. We do need to await. So in setup, we will destroy. Here, we will destroy. And we only have one other place where it's doing it, so we have 3 connections technically that we have to destroy. I did 3, but I meant 3. Unable to acquire a connection. What? Well, at least it ended, but it gave us an error. Which one of them did that, though? And I bet, let's see, let's look at our database. Show databases. Okay, so I think this destroyed, maybe it's reusing this connection. Or maybe they just happened to get the same one. The same one in the pool. That's unfortunate, if that is the case, but... Okay, so what's probably happening here is when just runs, it grabs both of these export functions, and through Voodoo, it ends up being the same connects instance. But what these folks are talking about that's in this issue that I will never click on that explains all of this, these two functions end up in kind of the same execution space or whatever. But this would not be. So we don't want to do this everywhere. I don't even know, do we need to actually call done here? I think you could do like whatever. I don't care. We'll keep it done. Let's come over here. Set up test file after inf. What is that? Set up files after env is a thing. A list of paths to modules to run some code to configure or set up the testing framework before each test file in the suite is executed. So set of files before the test framework is installed in the environment script presents. Okay. So it looks like let's create a just setup.js file. Just setup.js, and here we'll put our after all. And this will say after each test module blow up its connects instance. You know what though? Like the issue with this is that the test isn't going to have access to that connects instance because it's going to be inside of a model. So maybe this needs to be in there too, but then this doesn't have access to it. Let's see. Let's see what happens. Let's run. It feels like this is like almost like copy pasta in front of that, and then it goes, and magic happens. But apparently, it's not magical enough. So, I mean, like with that said, I don't even know how this shit would work, but dude said it works. So let's see if it works. Oh wait. Oh wait. We didn't configure it. Just config. What was it? Setup files. Setup files after inf. This is just.config.js. Let's console log maybe in here and see if we get something. Setup is running. So that code didn't run. Two modules that run some code. Wait. Derp. This is supposed to be setup, not config. What are we doing? It's getting late. Okay, so we did something. I'm just running connects is not defined. So, you know, that's kind of almost the, let's see, let's just We'll just keep on going. I don't think I need to do that. We're gonna do it. Yeah. So what we're gonna do for right now is back out this whole just setup thing and this. And we're just going to do it like this for now. And I am going to commit this canary to kind of come back here and look. But drop database, whack, test. Let's run this. There's going to be somebody on the internet that solved this problem. So we'll figure it out. But it's not something I have to figure out tonight. All right. So let's write some assertions. And I think this unit of work right here would be the last thing we do tonight. I don't want to jump into the composition function because if I'm already like mistyping past the files and stuff, it's just not going to be pretty. So what did we talk about making? It was assert database count, database has, database missing. So we'll say exports assert database has is an async function that takes a table name and a number of rows. Wait, that's not what this one is. Search database count is what this one is. Right. So now we'll do a couple of these. Assert database has, and this will be a fields object. And then assert database missing is kind of the same thing. This will basically be like we'll just call this function here and return it. We'll change these a bit. So let's say const. Ooh, might be time for me to take a break. Kitty's upset and wants to get out. I gotta find a different playlist. Listen to the same music every stream because it's the first like free license that can play on Twitch Spotify playlist that I found, but I am already quite bored with it. So say connects require API tills database. So assert database count would be return await. Let's see. Records equals await connects table. And then we'd expect records to have length, number of rows. And this would pass or fail. we have to do this, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Our exports will be these three functions. So assert that, assert that, assert database missing. So this would be const records equals await connects table where fields, and then you would just make sure it has at least one. So be at least one you have length. Does that have a greater than? No. Expect records.length to be greater than 0. And then this is just return assert database has table fields equals false. Oh no, this won't work because we're not going to be returning. We're calling these expectations, so we just need to write this out. Which is easy enough. So expect records to have length 0. Yeah. So now if we come over here, we can do something like let's go to our controllers, channels. Easily do this. Yeah. Get rid of all this. You know what we can do? Let's leave all this here, but we will write a test for our test util. So this is a test module for the test modules, and we'll call this a database, maybe. If I do this, it'll run for all tests. I don't know if I want to do that. So we'll say db test. And our key for database test will be db. Might change that to like something else, like int for integration test or something later. But all right, so let's get our assertions on the right. Test can assert table has certain amount of rows in it. So we're going to create a channel. So we'll say channel, and we need to .source API that. So here it's going to be async. We'll await. Yeah, I copied it. No, I didn't. Create body is this needs to be base64 encoded. So base64. There we go. And owner ID, I think, is what we need to set. Yeah. Or just owner. Good. Channels. Yeah, owner is going to be a number. So we'll just say 1. This might break because we don't have a user at that ID. But that's okay. So now we can assert database. Well, no, we've got to import that. So let's bring our assertions in. Assert database count, assert database has assert database missing equals require assertions. So assert database count channels 0 and assert database has, we'll wait these channels body and owner 1. And while we're at it, we'll just make up something that's missing. So assert missing foo and 99. And that'll be the end of the test. All right, so let's see. Okay, so one thing we didn't do is run our migrations. So we have a database, but there's no tables in it. So we need to go do that. To do that, we're going to go open up the Connects documentation again and see what the programmatic interface for running migrations is. Run migrations programmatically. But it's this. Where's Connects.js. Migrate. Here, I'll be right back. I'm gonna grab a drink and let this cat out before he tears the door down. I'll be right back. All right. So let's see. The frustrating thing with this is going to be it's going to push us towards like the command line as much as possible. So what was it? Connects.migrate.latest. Migration API. So I wonder if we literally just run this in our setup. Run seeds. We'll comment this out for now, but I do want to see what it does, because it may, if it runs without us having any seeds, then that's happy. I'm happy. Create table, no database selected. Okay. Let's see, connects, select, database. I mean, I know we can do something like this, I think. Let's see if this works. No. I need to add an argument to this where you can just run a query automatically. Drop database, whack, test. So what I do want to see is whether our database is getting created. So I'm going to comment this out real quick, run this again, and then log in and take a peek around that database and see if our tables are getting created, migrations run, all that. I want to say it feels like they are. And then this isn't connected to the right database. Yeah, so it is running migrations. That just means that the code running inside this environment isn't selecting that database. So that's kind of frustrating in a way. This should fail because Connects won't have that database. Yeah. Connect set database at runtime. Yeah, This is what I'd seen before. Next, unknown database. Ooh. It looks like this is going down the path of having a completely separate config used to manage the rest of the database, and then your app uses other stuff. So let's think maybe a different way. I wonder if we could mess around with that. I might not have the brain cells to do it tonight. You would think something like this would just be like front and center in the Connect docs. Guess nobody's testing their shit. Yeah, that's basically what we need. It's like since all those models get their own Connect instance, and they're basically getting this Connect instance that doesn't have a database set. So you know, in here we could be like connects raw, use database, whack test. This really wouldn't work because this would run in a promise and probably actually finish after this instance gets used. But that's kind of what we need. Is almost like a way of setting this here. So another way I guess we could do it is you could say like your connects file is actually this, right? And then before we make our connects instance, we'd say like if process.env. This is throwaway code. I wouldn't want to leave this like hard coded in here, but we could say connects file test connection database equals whack test. And I bet it works now. As long as we didn't blow up all this other stuff. Can I read connection of undefined? What? Oh, it's because we index in, so this just needs to be connection. Or not. Connects file. Connections. Can I read property connection of undefined? Can I read property connection undefined? Connects file is not undefined because I log it. It's logging. Oh, this may be coming from something else. So do this. What is that? The connects file should look right. Oh, you know what? Don't we have to pass it in here? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm gonna take care of this tomorrow or off stream. I'm too tired to mess with it tonight. But because the database should be there now. No database, whack test. It's so frustrating. Ban MySQL, whack, show databases. It's not there. It's almost like this isn't running before this runs. Which that really doesn't make sense. I'll also say, like, if we use the connects instance itself to just insert a row in here, then we could go through all this. But I do want to figure this out because this is the type of code we'll end up writing. So it is important to get it to work. So, but it ain't wrong. There ain't a whack test database in there, even though, you know, it should be getting created here. And I don't even think, you know, well, we are dropping the database now, so I don't know. We'll figure this out tomorrow. I think I'm gonna get out of here. So we'll pick right up where we left off here and get through the rest of this assertions and probably do some composition API stuff tomorrow. Bring in Axios and actually start shaping that up. And that'll be basically building a JavaScript interface for our front end to use to access the API. The next step is we're going to build a front end for everything. login page, chat interface, channel browser, like all that stuff. So we'll be out of the back end for at least a little bit. So that'll be a good change. Anyway, I'll be back on around the same time tomorrow. I'll see you then. Bye.